Hello and very warm welcome to the sessions on Indian economy. So we are discussing the demand and supply. We have discussed demand. Now let's focus on supply. See, when we talk about demand, we have to link the concept from the point of view of consumer because it is the consumer who will demand, right? But when we talk about supply, we have to understand the concept with the point of view of producer or a seller, right? Because it is a producer who will supply goods and services in the economy, right? So when we talk about supply, it is about the quantity of a commodity that a producer is to willing to sell at a given price, willing and able to sell at a given price, right? This is supply. Now, when we say supply is about quantity of a commodity that a producer is willing and able to sell at a particular price. Now, what do we mean by this? Suppose if we talk about law of supply, when price changes, supply will change, but how it will change? So we have to understand that it is the motivation of the supplier to supply. If price is increasing, the profit is also increasing. If price is increasing for a particular product, right, then profit is also increasing for a seller. You don't have to think from the point of view of a consumer. Now think from the point of view of a producer, seller. So if price of a particular commodity is increasing, what is happening? The motive of supplying the goods, right, the motivation behind it, that is profit. Profit is also increasing. When profit is increasing, the motivation to supply more and more will be there. And if profit is decreasing, for example, if price of a commodity falls, so what will happen? The motivation to supply more and more commodity will also fall, and hence the supply will decrease. So if we talk about law of supply, what we understand here, that price of a commodity to be supplied, price of commodity to be supplied is directly proportional to, or is directly linked with, quantity of a commodity, quantity of that commodity. What do we mean by this? For example, if price increases, profit is there, so quantity, supply will also increase. And if price decreases, quantity to be supplied also decreases. Let's understand this with a graph or this tabular information, right? What is this? This is price and this is quantity supplied, right? Quantity to be supplied. Now, for example, if price is 10, now at 10 we are supplying 100 units of a particular commodity. Now what is happening? Price is increasing. Price has increased from 10 to 20. So our supply will also increase because now there will be more motivation to supply. Now if price further increases from 20 to 30, now motivation again increases, so it is suppose 300, right? Now let's plot this on a graph. So this is known as what? Quantity to be supplied, and this is price. Now there are three prices, as we can see, 10, 20 and 30. This is quantity supplied. This is 100, 200 and 300. Now as you can see here, at price 10, this producer is willing to supply 100 units. So at 10, producer is willing to supply 100 units. This is your first point. At price 20, producer is willing to supply 200 units. So this point, second point is here. And at rupees 30, at price increases, quantity to be supplied increases. Now these are the 3 points. If we join these 3 points, it is our what? Supply curve. This is what? Our supply curve. So as you can see, it is upward sloping, right? Downward sloping is the demand curve and upward sloping is a supply curve. Now this is our supply curve, right? Now one thing we have to understand here, that if price is changing, suppose now price is increasing from 10 to 20, so quantity supply is also increasing from 100 to 200. We have movement along the curve. Price further increases from 20 to 30, we are having movement along the curve and we reaches to quantity to be supplied at 300. Similarly, if price decreases from 30 to 20, we are decreasing quantity to be supplied and we reaches here. So if price is changing, then we have movement along the curve. So this is supply curve, and if price changes, in what way price changes, that we have seen here. If price increases, quantity supply increases. If price decreases, quantity supply decreases. If price changes, then we have movement along the curve, right? We have movement along the curve. This is what we have, right? Movement along the curve, right? I hope it is understood. If price is changing due to, if quantity supply is changing due to change in price, then we have movement along the curve. Now there are factors other than the price of a commodity which influence supply of a particular commodity, that we have to see, right? So factors other than price of a commodity affecting its supply. Now let's see this. First factor that we can talk about here, there are many factors, right? First factor that we can talk about here is technology. If technology improves for production of a one particular commodity, then what will happen? If technology is improving, cost of production may come down and you will be able to produce more and more commodity at less and less cost. So you will be saving a lot. That means your profit will increase. So if technology improves, what will happen? Profit margin will increase, and hence what will happen? Quantity supply to be increased. And if technology become worsen, right, due to any reason, if technology becomes worsen, technology to produce become worsen, then quantity to be supplied decreases. So if technology improves, quantity to be supplied increases. If technology becomes worst off, then quantity supplied to be will be decreases, right? So this is idea about the change in technology. Because what happens with change in technology, you have advantage of maybe economies at scale. You will be able to produce more and more number of quantities at less and less cost, because raw materials you are purchasing in wholesale and at bulk quantity, so you will be having less cost for the quantity of input that you are purchasing, etc. So when technology improves, your motivation to supply also increases, because at lesser and lesser cost you will be able to produce more and more quantity, right? So only motivation here is profit. If profit increases, that means quantity supply will be increased. For example, level of taxation in an economy. Taxation, right? For example, there is a particular commodity for which the tax is at 10%. So there is a commodity which is having price of 100 rupees. Now, when we are taxing at 10%, when tax is at 10%, what will be the value? 110, right? Now, suppose tax increases 100 rupees and now tax increases to 50%. What will be the value of commodity? 150, right? Now, please don't see it like this, because what we are doing, we are managing indirect taxes. Otherwise, this tax has to be paid by the consumer, by the producer. So, if we understand the real picture behind this, when tax is 10%, That means 10 rupees will go to the government and you will have 90 rupees as your as your value, right? Whatever you are earning here. Now, when we say tax at 50%, so 50 rupees will go to government, and this will be to producer, and 50 rupees will be there for producer. This is the meaning of taxation. Why? Now, when there is indirect tax, for example, the GST we pay, right, on tuition fee, on, for example, the sale and purchase of goods, etc., then what is happening there? The burden is on producer. The burden is on producer. But what producer do? Basically, producer shifts the burden of tax on consumer. Otherwise, this is the real scenario. Now, what is happening here? When tax increases, the profit of producer decreases. So if tax increases, if amount of tax or the rate of tax increases, profit decreases. When profit decreases, quantity to be supplied will decrease. And if tax decreases, for example, this is the first case and this is second case. So here tax was 50%. Now tax amount has decreased, tax percentage has decreased. Tax rate when decreases to 20%, when tax rate decreases to 10%, from 50% to 10%, now profit margin increases. When profit margin increases, quantity supply increases. Let's understand the shift in curve here. This is the table that we can rely upon, right? And we can extend this, right? This is, suppose, for example, we are talking about prices, right? So this is price. This is when quantity supply, when tax is at 10%, and this is quantity supply when tax is at 50%, right? So there are two cases, when tax is at 10% and tax is at 50%. Now prices remains the same, 10, 20 and 30. We can take this also, 100, 200 and 300. Now what has happened? Now, or we can take this as absolute values, like for example, we can take it like 200, 300 and 400, right? And when tax percentage increases, when tax rate increases for the goods, what will happen? Profit margin will decrease. When profit margin decreases, this quantity to be supplied decreases. Now quantity to be supplied is decreasing. For example, for rupees 10, for price 10, we are willing to supply, earlier 200, now only 100. Earlier 300, now only 200. Earlier 400, now it is only 300. And when we plot the supply curve here, 10, 20, 30, this is prices, right? Prices, and the quantities, as you can see here, 100, 200, 300, 400, right? At price 10, in first case, 200, 300 and 400. So this is our supply curve, right? This is our supply curve 1. But when level of taxation increases in the economy, as you can see here, at price 10, now you are willing to supply only 100 units of a commodity. This is your first point. At 20, now 200. This is your second point. And this is third point. Now you can see here, this is supply curve 2, right? So what has happened? When taxation level has increased, supply curve has shifted towards its left, right? So when quantity supplied decreases, when quantity to be supplied decreases, right, supply curve shifts to left, to its left. What do we mean by this? Supply decreases. Supply decreases. And when supply curve shift to right, when supply curve shift to its right, that means supply increases, as you can see here. For example, this, if this is case 1 and this is case 2, then supply has increased. Here supply has decreased, right? So we have understood one thing. If supply is changing due to change in price, we will be having movement along the curve, and that will be known as contraction and expansion of supply. If increases, expansion of supply; if decreases, contraction of supply. If we have increase in supply due to factors other than price, then it is known as what? Increase and decrease in supply. If supply curve shifts towards its left, it is decrease in price, decrease in supply. If it shifts towards its right, it is increasing supply. I hope we are clear on this. So these are two factors. Let's discuss few more factors on which supply is dependent. Third thing that we can talk about is cost of input. Cost of inputs, right? For example, if a cost of an important input, if cost of an important input increases, important inputs, for example, you can talk about crude oil here, crude oil, petrol, diesel, etc., right? So we get petrol, diesel from crude oil only. Now suppose what is happening here, cost of input, like you are transporting your raw material from mining or from mines to, or from farms to industrial setup, right? So from farms to industry or from mines to industry, you are transporting your raw materials. Then again, after converting raw materials into finished goods, after processing it, after this particular activity which is being done in industry, this finished goods has to be taken to the market, right? So if logistical cost increases due to increase in price of crude oil, logistical cost will increase. The cost of transportation, logistical cost, or the cost of transportation, right? Now if crude oil price is increasing, these two prices will also increase. If crude oil price is increasing, logistical cost or cost of transportation will increase. If it is increasing, it will result into reduction in profit or reduced profit. If profit is reducing, that means motivation to supply will decrease, and it will result into quantity supplied to be decreased. So quantity supply will decrease. I hope we are able to understand this. Cost of input, for example, cost of raw materials, not only crude oil, raw materials. If cost of raw materials increases, what will happen? If raw material cost is increasing, that means again what will happen? The motivation to supply will decrease. Why? Because profit margin will decrease. So for producer, what matters is profit margin. If raw material cost is increasing, cost of raw materials increases, what will happen? The profit margin will decrease. If profit margin is about to decrease, if profit margin is about to decrease, what will happen? Quantity supply will automatically be reduced by the producer, right? So this is the idea of the supply and factors which are affecting supply other than the price. One more thing we can see here about cost of inputs we have seen, right? Now we can also talk about related goods. Price of related goods. Now what do we mean by this? What are the related goods here? Goods which are using same goods which are using or utilizing, which are using same raw materials for their production, same raw materials for their production. Let's understand this with an example. Let's take example of cheese and butter. Cheese and butter. Let's understand. Both are using raw material as a milk. Both are using raw material as a milk. Now, if suppose we are focusing on cheese. Cheese is our focus goods, right? Cheese is our focus goods. Now we are focusing on cheese. What is happening here? Suppose price of butter increases. If price of butter increases, what is the motivation of supplier? Motivation of supplier is to increase the quantity supply of butter. Now, if he want to increase the quantity supply of butter, more and more resources or raw material will be diverted towards production of butter only. So, if price of butter increases, more and more milk will be diverted towards the production of butter. So, if quantity of butter has to be increased, more and more milk will be utilized to produce more and more butter, and hence automatically what will happen? Quantity supply of cheese will decrease. Why? Because there is a motivation to supply more and more butter, right? So I hope the concept is clear. Price of related goods in case of supply, or in case of supply, related good means those goods which are utilizing same raw material, right? So if price increases for one particular good, for example butter in this case, more and more resources and raw materials will be diverted towards production of the commodity for which price increase is there, price rise is there, right? So this is, and hence the quantity to be supplied of other good will decrease, right? So this is about related goods. So these are the four factors basically on which supply of a commodity is dependent other than the price. Now we have already seen when price is changing, movement will be along the curve. When quantity supply is changing because of the factors other than price, then supply curve will shift. If supply increases, it will shift towards right. If supply decreases, it will shift towards its left, right? So I hope the idea is clear. Now let's understand one more concept related to equilibrium. Now let's understand what is equilibrium first. Equilibrium is a point where demand meets supply. Demand meets supply. Now we have studied demand and supply in isolation. Now we will be studying demand and supply together, right? So it is, equilibrium is a point where demand meets supply. That means there is no excess demand, no excess supply. I hope we are clear on this. No excess demand, no excess supply. Let's understand this through an example first. See, this is price, right? This is quantity demanded and this is quantity supplied. Now, price is 10, price is 20, price is 30 here, right? At price 10, you are demanding 300 units of a commodity. Here you are demanding 200 units of a commodity, and when price increases further, you are demanding 100 units of a commodity. Now, when we talk about supply, if price is less, you will be supplying less commodities. So it is 100 here, it is 200 here, and it is 300 in this particular case. I hope law of demand and supply is clear with this. When price increases, there is decrease in demand. When price increases further, decrease in demand further. When price increases 10 to 20, quantity supply increases. When price increases further from 20 to 30, the quantity supply also increases further from 200 to 300. I hope these are clear. Now, let's plot it on the graph and then we will see. Price is 10, 20, 30. Quantities are 100, 200 and 300. This is our supply curve. 10, 100, 20, 200 and 30, 300. So this is our supply curve. Now let's plot demand curve. At 10 it is 300, at 20 this is, and at 10 at 300, or at 30 it is 100, right? So this is demand curve. So this is demand curve and this is supply curve. And this point where demand curve meets supply curve, it is known as what? Equilibrium. This point is equilibrium point. This price is known as equilibrium price and this quantity is known as equilibrium quantity. Now let's understand the significance of this, how we reach at this particular point. Now see, at price 30, if we talk about case 1, that is at price 30, if we talk about, at price 30, what is there? Demand is 100. This is demand curve, no? So demand is 100 and at price, the supply is 300. So this is known as what? Demand is 100, supply is 300. This is known as what? Excess supply. I hope we are able to understand this. At price 30, you see only at 30, only at 30. What is happening? Demand is of 100 units and supply is of 300 units. That means this is excess supply that we are having, right? What will happen? When demand is 100 and supply is 300, price will start falling. When price will fall, what happens? Price will fall, supply will reduce, supply decreases. When price falls, what happens? Supply decreases. So as you can see, if price is falling from 30 to 20, what is happening? Supply is decreasing. And when price starts falling, what happens? Demand starts increasing. So as you can see, demand is increasing. So supply is falling on one hand, demand is increasing at other hand, and finally it will reach to what? Equilibrium. Finally it reaches to equilibrium. Similarly, I hope this is clear. At price 30, there is excess supply. So when excess supply is there, supply is more than demand, price will start falling. As price starts falling, supply starts reducing, and when supply starts reducing, when price starts falling, demand starts increasing, and they reach at an equilibrium point. Now please understand here, when we say price is 10, when we say price is 10, so just focus on this particular point only. When price is 10, supply is 100, supply is 100 and demand is 300. This is demand curve, so demand is 300. This is supply curve, so supply is 100. That means this point represents excess demand. So there is excess demand. Now what will happen? If demand is in excess, what will happen? Price will increase. What will happen? Price will increase. As price starts increasing, the commodity is in excess demand, so price will increase. When price increasing, because there is shortage of supply, so supply is less, demand is very high, so price will start increasing. As price will start increasing, consumer will, price increasing, so consumer will start decreasing the demand. And when price is increasing, there is motivation to increase supply, and finally they will meet at a point. Finally they will meet at this particular point known as equilibrium point again, and this is known as equilibrium point. And this is how excess demand and excess supply is taken care in the economy, right? So that is why it is known as forces of demand and supply. Now you can see how price is forced to reach to 20 at equilibrium, right? So this is the idea of forces of demand and supply, right? And how we reaches to equilibrium, and this is the equilibrium point that we have seen, right? Now let's understand one more concept, and this particular topic will be over. Let's take one case here. As we have already studied that when there is increase in income of the consumer, so we have to understand increase in income of the consumer on equilibrium. So increase in income of the consumer. Now, what we have seen? We have seen that this is equilibrium. Now, income of the consumer is related to demand, not to the supply, right? Income of the consumer is related to demand. Now, suppose what has happened here, income of the consumer has increased. So, for normal goods, demand will increase. Demand increases means demand curve. This is demand curve, right? This is demand curve, this is supply curve. So, when income of the consumer increases, demand curve shifts to the right. Now, it has nothing to do with supply. So, supply curve remains fixed. Now, this is equilibrium 1 and this point becomes what? Equilibrium 2. Now, what has happened? You can see here. This was the first point and this is the second point. This is price at equilibrium 1 and this is price at equilibrium 2. What has happened? This was the equilibrium. Suddenly income of the consumer has increased. Overnight, suppose overnight income of the consumer has increased. Now over the night supply cannot be increased because supply needs lot of other preparation, right? Production capacity needs to be increased, hiring more workers, taking more raw materials into the process, right? So price supply cannot be increased over the night, but demand can increase over the night because income of the consumer has increased over the night. Suppose when we say government is giving 15 lakh rupees to everyone's account, now what will happen? Suddenly the income of the consumer will increase, or the disposable income. Disposable income means which you can spend, right? Which you can spend. That is disposable income after paying taxes and all. Now, when your disposable income increases, you are demanding more and more commodities, but supply capacity has not increased. So when supply capacity has not increased, supply curve will remain at same point, right? So this is supply curve which will remain at same point, but demand curve has this is supply curve which has remained, which is at same point, and demand curve has shifted from DD1 to DD2. What it has resulted in? It has resulted into increase in price. It has resulted into increase in price. Now, if it is happening for one particular commodity, it is increase in price. Now, let's understand this particular phenomena is happening for almost 500 to 600 commodities in an economy. What will happen? This particular phenomena in macroeconomic terms, it will become what? Inflation. What do we mean by inflation? Rise in price. General rise in price of basket of commodities over a period of time, over a sustained period of time. We are not talking about price hike. It is price rise over a sustained period of time. Now, this inflation is known as what? Demand pull inflation. Demand pull inflation or demand side inflation also, right? Demand pull inflation or demand side inflation. I hope this is clear. Now let's see one more example. When price of one input increases, right? For example, price of oil increases. What will happen? This is supply curve. This is demand curve. Now, if price of oil increases, it will affect the supply side decision. So it is equilibrium 1 point. This is price at equilibrium 1. When price of one input increases, that is oil, what will happen? Supply curve will shift towards its left. Why it will shift towards its left? Because now there will be less supply because profit of the consumer is decreasing. So what will happen here? Again, there will be increase in price at equilibrium 2. So increase in price. So price has increased again. Now price has increased because of supply side constraint. So it is known as what? Cost push inflation. Cost push inflation or cost push inflation or supply side inflation. Supply side inflation. So we have seen two types of inflation: cost push and demand pull. If demand is increasing over the night and supply cannot increase, then it is known as what? Demand pull inflation. When supply decreases because of increase in one of the important input or for any other reason, if demand remains fixed and supply decreases, then what will happen? It will result into supply side inflation. Now supply side inflation has to be taken care by reforming the structure of the economy, by increasing the production capacity of the economy. For example, if oil prices increases, now we have to reduce logistical cost. Better infrastructure is needed, better roads are needed, logistical cost should be decreased, right? So it can happen by reforming our economy. So more reform in economy is needed. Also sometimes known as structural inflation is increasing because of reform in structure of the economy is needed, right? So supply side inflation can be taken care by reforming our economy or structure of the economy, right? So this is all about demand supply equilibrium, etc. In next class we will talk about production possibility curve and some marginal opportunity cost, etc., and that will finish the first module, right? So thank you very much, take care, bye bye.